Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that means Comic Book Wednesday, and that typically means Epic Comic Book Wednesdays, which is an event I do with Michael K Vaughan, where he and I both talk about some comic every Wednesday. But it's also Carb August, an event that Michael K Vaughan and I are both involved in, an event designed to celebrate trash, to read and reread trash and garbage for the month of August. And since Epic Comic Book Wednesdays were really Michael's idea, and I sort of glommed my way onto them, he does the picking of what we're going to talk about from Wednesday to Wednesday. And he announced well ahead of time that it was his intent to meld these two events for August and to have us read comic book trash for the month of August, which means Marvel comics. And he has picked 5 of arguably some of the worst Marvel comics ever made. He could have done a lot worse. I remind myself every time I look at his choices that there might be a Garb August next year. And he's never been shy about picking garbage on non-Garb August weeks either. So he has picked a large number of things that are not worth the paper they were printed on. And we are looking at one of those today, and today I am willing to admit, grudgingly, maybe a bit of a gray area, just possibly. We've gone back to an Epic collection, and we're talking about this Epic collection. Warrior of the Worlds, this is Killraven, a kind of a Marvel post-apocalyptic future series that came out in the 1970s. Killraven was created by Roy Thomas, of course. If you go into Marvel Comics or DC Comics, 70 comics of any kind, and the comic book is looking at some literary or comic book antecedent from the past, as this is, almost certainly the person behind that will be Roy Thomas. He was kind of the historian of comic books. And here he thought about H.G. Wells' novel The War of the Worlds, in which the Martians invade Earth in their famous tripod devices and are only brought low by the fact that they are not acclimated to Earth's bacteriological environment. They don't have any natural immunities to the things that we walk around in all day. It's not like they're gassed or anything. It's that Earth itself is inimical to them. But it's the Martian Expeditionary Force that's defeated in War of the Worlds. It's not the Martians themselves. And so Roy Thomas had the idea, well, what if they came back? What if the Martians regrouped, addressed the problem of viruses and bacteria, and also addressed Earth's atomic stockpile, which H.G. Wells didn't have to think about, but you'd want to address that if you were going to make a story in the 1970s. He thought, well, what if we did that, and I stuck to that, and we wrote about what happens after that? If the Martians come back, their technology would still be effortlessly superior to Earth. They would still conquer. What if they stayed in control and sort of enslaved the human population and bought off certain members of the human population to help enslave the human population? It's a vision that's there in the War of the Worlds. One character actually spins a couple of these hypotheticals, and Roy Thomas just thought that would be a great idea to run with, and he thought this would be a good addition to Marvel's burgeoning science fiction line of comics. So there aren't any actual superheroes when this starts. It wasn't called Killraven. It was called Astonishing Tales, I think, well, the title of the series was War of the Worlds. And at first, it's just the story of beleaguered resistance fighters, guerrilla fighters, who grow up either inside the Martian system as slaves, gladiators, that sort of thing, or outside it as renegades. And eventually some of these people, most especially the title character, Killraven, team up to try to bring down the Martian regime. And Roy Thomas reached out to Neil Adams, the great comic book artist Neil Adams, to draw the idea. And at first Neil Adams was right on board, but that never lasted long. And eventually both of them moved on. So that by the time you got to the first War of the Worlds issue in Tales to Astonish or whatever it was Jerry Conway who was doing the scripting. And Neil Adams' artwork is in there, but he's helped out a lot in that artwork, and then eventually it is just taken over by Howard Chaykin. Also a great comic book artist, although not great at the time of this series. He had a lot of learning to do. And it was launched. Jerry Conway is a practiced, talented comic book writer, so is Marv Wolfman, who did scripting on this series as well. But there are two kinds of comic book writers, right? I'm sure that you know this already. There are the standard storyteller comic book writers, people who are good at plot devices. They're good at surprise endings. They're good at reintroducing and introducing characters. They're good at coming up with villains. They're good usually at pacing, and they're completely reliable. You have people like Jerry Conway or Marv Wolfman or Stan Lee himself, or for instance Mark Waid. And then there's a different kind of comic book writer. They're probably good at a lot of those things too, but they're a lot brainier. They bring a whole other dimension to what they're doing, whether you agree with it or not. The standard discussion about these kinds of writers 50 years ago in the Marvel Comics offices was that the great thing about them is that they could make you a great comic book, and the bad thing about them is that their comics have spikes and edges, so they could lose you readers. It was usually the talk. The rubric was that if you had one of those other kinds of writers, those brainier kinds of writers, on a book, you had a better chance of that book getting canceled. And in short order, one of those writers came on board this book. Don McGregor is one of those writers. Steve Englehart would be another. There are a bunch of others that would come to mind. And slowly but surely, Don McGregor changed the nature of War of the Worlds, made it deeper, made it more interesting, certainly imported a lot more weird science fiction into it. But he wasn't helped out a lot with the artwork, because when War of the Worlds was not trying really hard with its artwork, and sometimes it was trying really hard. You start off with Neil Adams. That's about as good as it gets. You have Howard Chaykin. He wasn't at the full height of his powers, but he was still Howard Chaykin. Later on, you had Keith Giffen, and even the great Gene Colan. But in between then, you had other people, including my bête noir, Herb Trimpe. This is the cover of the Epic Collection, but I have old man props here, and I want to show you the cover of the last collection of this, which was the one that I actually had at a time years ago, when I was thinking that I wanted all the Gene Colan artwork that there was, all the Gene Colan artwork I could get my hands on. Once upon a time, eons ago, Marvel used to have a full-color reprint line called Marvel Masterworks. They still do. God only knows how valuable, how collectible this particular volume is. This is not it. This is one of you very kindly sent me an electronic version. This is the Marvel Masterworks volume of War of the Worlds. Okay, it's Amazing Adventures, not Astonishing Tales. It's Amazing Adventures. This is the first appearance of Killraven. There you can see the Martian tripods in the background, and you see this gorgeous John Romita Sr. cover. He designed the logo. He designed the character sketch up in the corner, and he designed that is Killraven. He designed Killraven's original Mankini costume. I don't know what he was thinking. I really don't. I think he was probably thinking, well, it's the 70s. I can be hep as well as anybody. But what he gave us was, a male stripper, which is perfectly okay for quite a few comic book readers at the time and since, but doesn't really summon the idea of a hard-fighting resistance guerrilla warrior. And this, I have no idea what this hardcover volume would retail for. Probably, it's either... with Michael K. Vaughan and I, when we do Comic Book Wednesdays, the things that we bring up, if they're not in print anymore, then either they are yours for $1 on eBay, or they're $200 and something. I have no idea which direction this would break in. But it did start off promisingly with Neil Adams artwork, which, that you never go wrong with Neil Adams artwork. No matter how rushed it is, no matter how poorly inked it is, you never really go wrong with it. But you can go wrong pretty easily and pretty surely with Herb Trimpe artwork. And it wasn't long before you started getting that. Let me see how long it took. I think it was Chaykin doing issue number 2 of this. Or maybe no, I think Chaykin was breaking down the outlines of the second issue of this. I don't think it was actually issue number 2. No, it's Amazing Adventures. The second issue of Killraven was number 19 of Amazing Adventures. And I think you can see by some of the paneling here that the rough outlines were still being done by Neil Adams. But then Chaykin was heavily overlaying them. And then everything went to heck in a handbasket, because it was issue number 3, which is number 20, the artwork turned to Herb Trimpe, who is one of the worst comic book artists who's ever worked in the field. Now, here we get a second Killraven costume, the one he's famous for, the one that you would have seen him in if you remember. For a fraction of a second, this character has appeared already on this channel when Matthew at Maybury Book Club and I did a reread of Avengers Forever. Killraven is one of the characters who's blink and you miss it there in that miniseries wearing this costume, also created by John Romita Sr., who did not want to let go of the boots, the thigh-high boots, but he's got rid of the rest of it. But it doesn't really matter how well designed the costume is. If you've got Herb Trimpe doing the artwork, let me give you a little taste. This is Herb Trimpe doing Jack Kirby, sort of imitating Jack Kirby, but whereas some artists could do that well, like Rich Buckler, for instance, others really can't, and Herb Trimpe couldn't. Here you have a giant mutant killer crab. It just makes you laugh. It doesn't look frightening. It's just silly. Killraven is a normal person. He's a normal human being. He doesn't have any superpowers, except that he was trained from infancy to fight in slave arenas. So he's really good at hand-to-hand combat. Here we have him fighting a character dressed as a swashbuckler in the old Lincoln Memorial. That is Herb Trimpe's. This is Herb Trimpe's idea of what the Lincoln Memorial looks like. And it gets a little bit better because Trimpe eventually leaves the book, and he's there for a long time, though. I mean, this is one of his splash panels. Look at that. But he eventually gives over the reins to other artists. He's a classic Herb Trimpe. I don't want to make this just bashing on him. He doesn't stay along forever, because although McGregor is still drawing this thing, he eventually gets a different artist. Now let's move ahead to the artist that he gets. Although if you've seen Michael's video on this, I'll leave a link to it down below, then you already know who I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a young guy named P. Craig Russell, who came onto the book and almost immediately changed the artistic register. This is, again, very early in his career. I think Howard Chaykin's work on this book may have been the very first Marvel work that he ever did, and some of the first comic book work that he ever did. And I bet this is very early in P. Craig Russell's work as well. First we get Gene Colan, but it doesn't work. There's only so much that you can do, even if you're Gene Colan. There's only so much you can do with what is, after all, a crappy book. Let's not forget that. Michael K. Vaughan makes some very interesting points in his video about how this maybe might not ultimately be crap, that there is kind of a through line, a narrative through line, especially once Don McGregor got his hands on it, where we see the growth of the character of Killraven from no dimensions to 3 dimensions. That's mostly wishful thinking on Michael's part. God knows how many $150 hardcover omnibuses he has of this stuff, but so it might be a little bit of the sunk cost fallacy. Here we go. P. Craig Russell came on board. He was a young and talented artist, and his first issue was, getting his legs underneath him. But it's the second issue that he has this as a splash panel, and that is not usual. That is unusual. That is when you know that an artist has been allowed to do interesting stuff. Look at this page layout. That's like very early Neil Adams or even Jim Steranko. That is a different kind of page layout. No traditional panels, and it ends up being beautiful. Even at the early stages, it ends up being just beautiful. And Michael K. Vaughan mentions this in his video, and I totally agree that when you're a writer, especially a really smart writer like Don McGregor, you are going to realize right away if you have an artist like this, and you're going to start writing for that. And it happens very early on. It happens. This stuff just becomes really appointment comic books. Now, I say that even though when these were coming out originally in the 70s, I don't think I was buying them. Even I mean, this is a bit of hindsight, right? Because I don't think I was aware of P. Craig Russell before I started seeing his artwork in here. I don't think I was even aware of him. And maybe looked at it and thought, this is Barry Windsor Smith knockoff art or something like that. It would be hindsight, knowing what this artist later became, how much better he became. He constantly improves and changes. But I guess I could say that if this old hardcover Masterworks thing, if this volume is affordable, if it's one of the ones that has become cheaper with time rather than more expensive. You can never tell how things break. Look, just lovely. You can never tell how things break in Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Because if this old Marvel Masterworks has become cheaper for the original P. Craig Russell artwork, it might be worth your time. But the stories are terrible. The characterization is insulting. There's one particular part, I don't know what Don McGregor was thinking, where Killraven is captured by an enclave of surviving humans who have not so much survived the Martian invasion as they have survived and lived through from blaxploitation films. You would not expect in a post-apocalyptic Martian science fiction adventure that the main character would ever be called a honky by anybody. I wouldn't spend more than $2 or $3 on this thing if you find it at a clearance bin. But something changed. There is something else to talk about here. Now, this is Steve navigating technology, so I want to make sure that you're being patient. But the War of the Worlds got canceled. There wasn't anything that even innovative artwork could do for it, and it was a while until it was brought back. Now, I have the physical copy of this thing somewhere here at Hyde Cottage. I could not find it. I wanted to have more than just an electronic prop, but I cannot find my copy. I know that I have it. Since it's not on any of my shelves, I'm assuming that it's in my long boxes of comic books, which means it's buried. It's in the only closet that I don't have access to. So I wasn't about to do that in 90-degree heat, but this is what I'm talking about. This is a Marvel graphic novel called Killraven, Warrior of the Worlds. That's where the Marvel Masterworks volume got its title. And this is Don McGregor and P. Craig Russell revisiting their character years later in order to finish up their storylines. You can see this is $5.95, and it's actually numbered. You can't really make it out here, but it's number 7, because at this point Marvel was still numbering its graphic novels, and I got them all. I got God Loves Man Kills. I got The New Mutants. I got Star Slammers. I got all of those original graphic novels, including the greatest one of all, The Death of Captain Marvel. And I still have them in those original forms, along with this. No idea why this got separated from the pack, but I had them all until they started getting crappy. Around 10 or 11, they started not being really spectacular productions, and at the time, what was it again? $5.95 was a lot to spend for a comic book. Now, an average issue of lesbians from the planet Twitter will be about $5. So an average issue, which is full of house ads, and what few pages of comic book art it has are the main character and all of her Yas Queen supporting characters sitting at a table eating. So yeah, once upon a time that would have been unthinkable, but I was willing to pony up the money for this. And this graphic novel is incredible. You can tell right from the beginning. That is how it opens. It's spectacularly done. Just P. Craig Russell, like I mentioned, he never sits on his artwork, so it is always better. With everything that he does is different in some way. Look at Killraven. It has gone from P. Craig Russell and trying to imitate Neil Adams, who's trying to imitate who knows what. It's gone from P. Craig Russell trying to do a stereotypical comic book superhero to P. Craig Russell asking his lover to pose as Killraven. It's kind of an amazing thing. And it goes on from there. It becomes just an elaborate science fiction story. This is a big, wonderfully involving graphic novel. Well, you just get his let's just call it his model to pose in any number of positions. He was also fond of drawing himself, but a lot of this is there's a subtext, I think, running through a lot of these. The reason why you have these chapters like this, because it's broken into chapters like this, and it is sort of meant to draw a conclusion to and put a bow on the Killraven storyline. And the one thing, here, let me get back to where I was. So that this is old guy fussing around with technology. But we'll get the one thing that, oh no, I don't want to do that. I want to go all the way out and then all the way back in. There we go. The one thing that when I watched Michael's video, the one thing that made me envious, the one thing that made me think, maybe I want this. I don't. I'm not going to get this Epic Collection. Because the Epic Collections are great. You get a lot of material, but they aren't cheap. They're $40. This has all of the run on War of the Worlds in Amazing Stories or whatever it's called. It has the 2 issues where Killraven guest starred in Spider-Man's book, Amazing Marvel Team Up. where Spider-Man, for a brief period of time, he was in the past for a 4-issue series, a 4-chapter story where he is trapped in colonial New England. And when that storyline ends, Spider-Man is catapulted into the time stream. So he goes into the future, he meets Killraven, he goes into the future, he meets Deathlock. And it underscores something that's true in Marvel. It isn't so much true in DC, which is that most of the future stories in Marvel stories tend not to be set in the future, but most of them are set in dystopias. Marvel seems to think that Earth has a really rough patch in front of it. Killraven, for instance, is set during a period when the Martians have invaded and conquered Earth. And there's also a long stretch in the future, the setting of the original Guardians of the Galaxy, where Earth has been conquered again, not by the Martians, but by the Badoon. So there's no Legion of Superheroes in Marvel, not anywhere near as high profile as the Legion of Superheroes is in DC Comics, where no matter what horrible things the world goes through to get to it, eventually, 1,000 years from now, they have a bright, shining planet with a beautiful, heroic super team. That doesn't seem to be the case here, and Spider-Man gets a little tour of those dystopias in his own book. That's included in this epic collection, and so is that graphic novel, which is amazing. That is a real inducement to get this thing. This character was also revived in a really good miniseries. Let's see if I can get to that without too much trouble. There was a miniseries that came out. Let's see, it's under K, right? So if it's alphabetical, it shouldn't be too hard for me to find it. Yes, this came out in a miniseries by Alan Davis that has just amazing artwork throughout. It really is worth owning. There is Killraven #1. As you can see, Alan Davis brings back the Mankini, does his best, like a personal challenge, to make it impressive instead of silly. And he does all of the interior artwork too, so you can see what it's like for Killraven to fight in a Mankini, to fight and to conquer, and also to be really chummy with other muscular young men. This miniseries is also well worth finding. No idea if it was ever collected. But that is our trash comic book for today. It's Killraven. And as Michael sort of gleefully points out, there is one more Wednesday left in August. So we have more comic book trash to deal with before Carb August breathes its last. I cannot recommend the Killraven Epic volume unless what you have heard has not dissuaded you. If you have a real sweet tooth for post-apocalyptic conquered Earth type science fiction, or if you have the aesthetic palette for that early P. Craig Russell artwork, if you have those things, then sure, it's probably worth it. God knows you should get it now rather than wait, because its collectability could drive its price way up. I'm going to check when this video is over to see what that Marvel Masterworks volume costs now. But if you don't have that, you're not going to find, there isn't much in the way of writing in these things that will really do it. Michael might be right. It might be possible to construe some sort of long-form character arc for Killraven over the course of all these issues, but he's a cockeyed optimist. You're going to have to wade with your thigh-high boots through a lot of garbage to get to that character arc, so it might not be worth your time. But anyway, that's Epic Book Comics for today. We'll be back next week. We'll see what kind of garbage Michael throws against the wall then. Thank you, BookTube.